Hello and welcome to the Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Eric.
And I'm Jack. Did we time it right this time?
Yeah, I think you got it right. We're getting slowly but surely better at introducing ourselves on this podcast.
I like it.
Well, thank you for listening to our listeners out there. Thank you for coming back. Jack, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good at this belated hour where I am on the precipice of one of the final missions of Frosthaven in like 2 years of playing Frosthaven, and it's a lot to have all come together. Like, I think we are on like 90 log plays at this point. So we have decided, even though that there's some other content, we're going to try to finish up this campaign. We've unlocked all the characters. We've done most of the story side stuff, and we are now just finishing out the remaining story, like mainline quests, and I think we're on like the penultimate one. So excited, a little bit skeptical as to our success because the finale missions have been progressively harder, but otherwise doing good. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing pretty well. I've had a overall pretty lovely day, and I'm excited to chat with you. I've gotten some gaming in over the last week. I don't know what came over me, but I am like full send on Board Game Arena plays right now.
Yeah, you're leaning in.
I'm just like cracking them out whenever I get the chance. So I played Arc Nova for the first time, and when everything's automated, boy, does that game go real fast. I cranked a game out in like 35 minutes. It was 2 players, so that definitely eases it up. But it was like, this is going.
You're cooking.
Zooming.
Now that you have a little bit of distance on Arc Nova, how are you feeling about it? Like, it made a huge splash when it came out. Like, of course, to me, the biggest thing that brought it to my attention was when Tom Vassell was like, oh, this is my new favorite game. It's displaced my long-running favorite game of all time, and this is now my favorite game. And I was like, whoa, that is a statement and a half.
Yeah.
And I still really like it. It gets a lot of play in the home. How are you feeling about it?
I really like it. Like, it's so... Once you get your head around the concepts, everything just works exactly how you think it's going to. Everything just like makes sense for the most part. There are some times when the theme, I think, doesn't match perfectly, like when the animals are... I have a jaguar, and that lets me add... I'm going to hunt 4, which means I look at 4 cards from the deck and take 1 into my hand. It just feels like that one should just be like, I don't know, get some points or something. It kills an animal.
Let me throw this at you.
Yeah.
Reskin as a Pokemon game where you're building your Pokemon Safari, and now they are abilities of the Pokemon, and it's not that they're hunting one another, it's, that they're recruiting battling. Or attracting one another, or even battling. Yeah.
I think that's, first of all, Nintendo would never let a good board game exist. They would put that in stop that in its tracks immediately. I think that's actually a really great reskin. You've sent me that before. I haven't ever actually gotten around to it. But the reskin makes a lot more sense where it's like, oh yeah, this is my Pokemon's ability. I get to do this thing. I can see it working a lot better in terms of how it thematically meshes with what we're doing here.
In terms of Pokemon reskins, I actually heard recently in the discussion around FinSpan, which is the recently announced continuation of the Span cinematic universe, that Jamie Stegmaier actually has stated, and I don't have citations on this, so I hope this isn't just me regurgitating something I saw on the internet and therefore assumed it was true, but he actually did look into approaching Nintendo for the purposes of doing a span Pokemon game to have the license, and that just wasn't going to fly. But then instead of Wormspan and Finspan as sequels, we could have like a Pokespan, like a
Pokespan.
Articuno span.
A span type game.
Type. Oh man, we're getting into strand types. Yeah, I would love that.
I think that also makes sense in terms of theme, where it's like, again, I think that anytime there's like, this animal has an ability and it has to affect the game, so we have to work within the constructs of the game. I don't know why Carolina Chickadee gets to cash a wheat on the card. It eats wheat. Sure. That's where.
Sure.
That's
I
where
mean,
it goes.
at a certain point, you have to just kind of accept that for some games, the theme isn't going to translate. So it's more of an abstraction. I mean, all games are abstractions.
Yeah, and I think that there's... go ahead.
One particular example of this is a game that I played, and I wanted to make sure to mention, was Fromage, which is a game that... Have you played Fromage yet?
I went through the tutorial on Board Game Arena.
I was going to say, you should check it out on BGA if you haven't played it. It's very idiosyncratic. It's a worker placement with a time element in that when you're placing workers, they're on this lazy Susan that rotates around, and depending on which direction that they're facing on any given round is when you can retrieve them back. Ultimately, that's just, time ticking by for a 3-time placement, a 2-time placement, or a 1-time placement. But it is a game that very much wants to live in the universe of its fromagitude. It really wants to sit in that cheese universe with its parochial illustrations and pastoral elements. But at the same time, it is just so divorced from any sense of cheese making to just kind of be like a point chasing idiosyncratic game. It really reminds me in a lot of ways, both visually and mechanically, something like Grand Austria Hotel, like a Euro game that would have come out in the late aughts that would have been the darling, the Euro du jour, but now doesn't quite hit the thematic elements that a lot of other games would. It's cool. Kind of reminds me of like Zolkien or something, but maybe a little brain burny and a little too abstract for the level of brain burning that I'm looking for in a game. I was kind of expecting it to be something that really captured my heart because I love cheese and I love farming in games, but I didn't really get the cheese element and I didn't really get the farming element, and instead I just got brain burning timetable element. So that's my fromage story.
Girls with fromagitude.
Yeah. We need to live in the fromagitude at the moment. Now, as far as BGA, or have you only been playing on BGA, or have you gotten any other games in?
I haven't gotten any other games in. I've had a busy work week. My work schedule right now is just like, it's a lot of nights, and so I have time off during the day. But everybody has jobs during the day. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
So not a ton. Not a ton hitting the actual table, but I've gotten another few plays of Harmonies in. It is just so easy to get to the table. Like, that's the thing, especially with, like, it's me and my wife playing, and it's just like, we both know the rules. We can crank out a game in such a short amount of time, but it still like has all of the impact I feel like it always has had. Where we're definitely getting a lot more now that we know the rules, we're getting a little bit more gamey. So I'm hoping that in the future there is a expansion that just changes things up enough. Because right now we're just in a loop of, and we still are loving the game. I will TCbH will get a review out at some point or another, but it's definitely like a game that my wife and I have both absolutely fallen for in terms of like, yeah, it is just so up our alley in terms of we want a game that we want to play in the next 15 minutes while we wait for a flight. It's in my backpack. I have everything. We're gonna crank it out. Cool, it's done, and we haven't needed to change gates, so we're just gonna go on again.
Do you have like a short list of killer combos at this point? Like, have you played it so much that you know that inherently the ducks work good with the frogs, or like some element like that where if they are on the table and you have the opportunity, you're going to definitely get both of these because it's too good not to whenever it comes up?
I think that there are some where we have taken note of it, but with the spirit animals, the way the landscape scores changes enough where there are definitely still some combos where it's like, okay, I know that with the bee, I need a tall tree and 3 fields. Okay, so I'm going to have 3 fields together. I can probably chain that together. I'm forgetting what animal it is, but I know there's like an animal where it's 2 fields together and then a mountain on one side. I think it's either the llamas or the meerkats, and I'm forgetting which one exactly. But it's like, if you know that you're going to need to build trees for your spirit animal, that's a really easy, I'm going to grab that. But also at the same time, because you can only grab one animal at a time, my wife and I are both very much aware now of, I'm not letting you get that. I'm going to take that animal out of spite. And that just is how we play frequently.
I'm going to give the audience a peek behind the curtain here and say that I'm looking at a Google Doc here, and it says games, Eric, challengers. So I want to know what is challengers. I don't even know what this is. So like, I have bated breath.
I had not heard of it. Like, I must have missed it completely. It came out 2 years ago. So it is do you know what Super Auto Battle Pets is? That's not the exact title. I forget off the top of my head because I haven't actually played it. But it's an auto battler.
Yes.
You set everything up beforehand and then it just runs and you hope that it works out. Right. It promises to be that. It's more of a game of war that you're playing, where the cards have effects, but it's a deck builder within war. So you, at the start of a round, get to look at 5 cards. You add 1 or 2 of them into your deck, shuffle, and then you just randomly play your cards, hoping to beat whatever your opponent has. The thing that I think is weird and interesting about it is every match is 1v1, but it's a round robin within the game, and so you are like, if you're playing it in person, I played it on BGA, which definitely I feel like is the better way to play it because you don't have to actually move. You just the things move around for you. I'm moving a light around so that
So like if we're playing a 4-person game, I might do a match that is against the person right next to me or the person who's directly across from me. Like, the way that I test my deck is always against one other deck at a time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So you're always testing it against one other deck at a time. So if you have 4 players, there are 2 fields, I think is the call, but they're just the playmats. You have 2 playmats. You have your deck to one side, your opponent's deck to the other. Whoever goes first, which is determined not fully randomly, but there's a lot of randomness to it. But whoever goes first flips a card, they capture the flag. It's a capture the flag game. Your opponent flips over cards until they beat whatever card is on top, like number wise, and then you take your person, move them to the bench, they consolidate, and you just have to beat whatever of their card is on top. And it's just a game of war where you keep flipping until you beat your opponent. You go until either somebody's deck runs out, and whoever has the flag at that point wins, or a person's 6-slot bench gets full. One or the other, whoever wins the match gets a trophy, which is worth a random number of points. And you play until you play 7 rounds, I think it is. It's either 6 or 7 rounds. And then whoever is the top 2 in terms of points plays one more round just against each other. And it doesn't matter. Points don't matter at all at that point. It's whoever wins that last round is the winner. I found it very interesting because it is... And this kind of gets into what I think our theme is going to be, but it is all luck. But at the same time, I felt like I had so much control over it, in a way that I felt is rewarding. And I think that is a thing that we're going to talk about. Our topic for the day is luck in board games, which is why I thought this game was a really interesting one for me to play today randomly. Before we filmed this, which I think this is like such a divisive topic, or it can be at least, where there's a lot of opinions on how much luck should be in a game. I'd like to hear just your very above board thoughts of what do you think about luck in board games?
Yeah, well, of course, I like games of all types, and I tend to look for not, like some homogenized, this is my zone of exactly what I like and how close games are to that. I try to look at the individual strengths of a game. So I can really enjoy a game with very little luck in it, so long as it does very well within that and hits on some of the things that I love most about games. But I can also really enjoy games with high amounts of luck. Personally, my own perspective on this is that luck isn't itself the problem. When people are talking about like, oh, I hate games with a lot of luck, it's a lack of control and ability to mitigate that luck, and a feeling of disempowerment at the hands of luck. For the most part, when we're talking about modern hobby games, we're talking about strategy games where there is an element of skill, where you are doing something that is either testing yourself against the game itself in a cooperative game, or you're testing yourself against an opponent. And many of the games that we play, especially Euro games, are this kind of like multiplayer solitaire where you're kind of just testing yourself against yourself and then seeing in the end how you rank against other people. Mm-hmm. But in those, I think that for the sake of the way we consume these games, luck is a necessity. Luck is a balancer. It's an accessibility point. It's something that brings people in, and without it, I don't think this hobby would be nearly the fun, approachable, inclusive thing that it currently is.
Yeah, I think my big thought on it is nobody wants to play a game where they feel like they never had a chance to win. And I think that goes both ways, where you have people who, if there is no luck in the game, then somebody who has played it more than you is just going to win every time, no matter kind of what you do. And I think
I kind of disagree with you there. I think the majority of people, yes. I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of adults don't like looking stupid, and that's a
Yeah.
lot of people's resistance against playing games, is because they think that an inability with it is somehow or like losing at a game is somehow like a reflection of their intellect, and we as adults tend to be very insecure about that. But at the same time, like, if I go play a game of basketball or soccer or something with someone who is very, very good at the sport, I know I'm going into that destined to lose. I can still have fun doing it,
Yeah.
seeing how much resistance I can put up against them. I don't necessarily need a lot of random elements that are going to give me a leg up on my opponent to gain something. But I think something about tabletop games has this inherent mistrust that they're going to somehow embarrass you. So very heady games with a lack of luck can be something that, like, a lot of people bounce off against. But chess is one of the most popular games in the world, right? And there's no RNG elements of chess.
Yeah.
And yet, people will play against other people that they know are better than them, and they know there's virtually no chance for me winning, but I'm still getting something out of playing it.
Yeah, well, I think my point is more that I think people at least enjoy feeling like they have a chance. Even, I mean, chess is definitely a great example where people are going to play to learn against a person who is much better than them, and I think chess is actually probably the best example, just in terms of it's a game. There's no luck. There's no hidden information. There's no roll of the die. That is as best of a zero luck game as we're gonna get, and I feel like it's always used as an example because of that. But with chess, it's people definitely feel, I think, more pressure to play chess, and if chess was not like the
king's game
institution that it is,
right.
I feel like if you're just a person described chess and they're like, hey, there's a person who has played for like 1 year, they're going to beat you.
Right.
People
right.
not necessarily, I think, trend towards that. And at the same time, people definitely don't want to have it where the luck takes out of their hand their chances of winning. And I don't think that there are a ton of games that do one or the other. I think that there are a lot of games fit somewhere in the middle, but it always is going to be something that it's a tightrope that game developers have to walk of you want some form of luck in the game. I think a lot of games that do it the best are either games where the luck happens before you have to make any decisions. Like,
Right.
the luck is you've pulled tiles out of a bag, your options are different now, but you know what's going to happen when you take your turn. Like, like, if you play this card or take these tiles, this is what's going to happen. And I think a lot of times when people are not happy with luck in games, it tends to be where it's, I think the term is output randomness.
Right.
Input randomness is fine, where the new information is going to change your decision, but your decision is definitely like pretty solid of, I know that this is going to happen, or I know that these are the odds of what's happening. Like in sorry. In arcs, you know that when you take the attack action, you're going to roll dice, and you can choose which dice you're going to have. You can't guarantee what they're going to do because you're rolling dice, and that is random. But you know that those are the odds you're taking, and that just kind of is, I think, inherent to the game, where you are, first of all, also choosing the dice, so you're choosing what odds you have. But that's a game where there is a little bit of output randomness, but that is a little bit the point of the game. Or something like Cubitos is probably another great example where it's the point of the game is you're pushing your luck. You have so much control over your luck, and whenever the luck doesn't favor you, it feels like it's your fault and that you were in control. You drove the car off the bridge, and you busted, and now you're not getting to move on this turn. But that's, I think, what people want from games. They don't want it to be a thing where I can roll the dice and I'm going to just randomly end up losing money, and that was my turn. I didn't do anything.
Right. And I think, like everything, this is a spectrum. Some people are going to like some things, some people are going to like others. And what influences what circumstances you're going to like, luck or not, is going to be dependent from person to person to person. But, like stepping back from all that subjectivity and just kind of getting into breaking this into smaller chunks here. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've actually asked a couple designers about this throughout interviews in the life of the Cardboard Herald. And I find that one consistent thing that I've heard that I tend to agree with, because I only retain the information I agree with or vehemently disagree with, is that luck should be in some ways inversely proportional to the amount of investment that you're putting into a game. And where I predominantly hear that is time. Like you don't want to play like a big 6-hour game where luck or randomized element is the sole determining factor for why you won or lost. But in a game that's only like half an hour, that may be exactly what you're looking for. But I've kind of like taken that a different direction, and it's more about the investment in general, the collateral that you're putting down beyond just time. Time is one example of that, but I think the mental investment, the game that is engaging and asking you to operate at a level of complexity that is really crunchy and intensive. That's a game that you don't want the outcomes of things to be heavily luck-based. And I think Arcs is a great example of something that does thread that needle a bit. Sure, there's randomization in how the cards are dealt. Though it's a predictable amount of randomization because you know what the entire contents of the decks are. And by gaining certain cards, the numbers are balanced out such that if you have higher numbers, you have fewer actions. If you have lower numbers, you have more actions. It's always trying to give some sort of balancing element that is more about giving you that randomized input, and in theory, you should be able to make something work out of that. And then you get to things like the dice rolls, which are picking the dice. So you can choose how much risk that you're investing, but the number of dice that you have is based off of decisions that you made in the game. And the dice themselves have far less range of outcomes than a typical D6. They are D6s, but the faces are not spanning 1 through 6 as an output.
Yeah.
So the amount of possible outputs is much more easy to account for and predict, while still not making guaranteed outcomes. And I think that's really the sauce when it comes to strategy games and luck or randomized elements and RNG, which for those of you who are old people like me who didn't use RNG in your average vocabulary growing up, random number generation is, like how you're creating elements in computer games, but that has kind of crossed over from computer games into tabletop games and other elements where these are seeds for certain outcomes, but really people are just talking about randomization. dice, cards, that kind of stuff. But I did.
Sorry, I was just gonna
go ahead.
really add on to that quickly. I think it extends even past like the amount of luck should be inversely proportional to investment. I think that also extends past just the game in general and goes even to like each action within the game. Like I think that there are a lot of things where in arcs the randomization of your dice rolls, I feel like makes sense that it's that random because it's one of your pips is the attack. And you can throw in more pips if you want to make sure the attack happens, but it is like there's that. There's also like, you know, if you're doing an action that has no randomness, and then there's a separate side action that you just get to do as a bonus that's like fully random, I think nobody is going to really find many complaints about that.
Well, let's take it to a scenario of something that you played recently with Arc Nova. And one of the things that you're going to have to deal with in that game is that you may set yourself for the best damn bird engine that's ever existed, where you get so much based off of the bird tags that are going to come up.
Yeah.
And you put in the effort for that to happen, but because there is only one of each card in the entirety of the deck, and that is a monstrously sized deck, there's no way to control that there's an even distribution of specific cards in there. You may run into a situation where you're just not drawing all the bird cards that you need. And that can have a drastic effect on your game, and it's something that you couldn't have necessarily anticipated and can absolutely tank you. You know, how do you feel about that sort of investment when it comes to randomized cards that are coming up? And how do you like to see that addressed in a game?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really solid example of sometimes you have put in a ton of effort into a very narrow outcome span, where it's you have gotten all of the bird tag things there, but you in theory should know that the deck is really massive and you should maybe diversify what you're doing. And that is, but that's like a thing that
you're telling me I shouldn't invest all my stocks in one thing only.
I'm just saying, if you invest your stocks in Storks, it might not work out.
Good call.
Put it
Good
out
call.
there.
All right.
But I think that there are things like that in games, and Arc Nova is an example that I think is pretty solid with this, where it's the cards are there is so many cards that just don't affect you. Like, especially if you're getting late game and you're like, everything on the table right now is nonsense. I cannot use any of it. Or it's
get out of here, guinea pig. We don't want you.
I don't want it. And I think that I haven't played. It's on Board Game Arena. I have not played with the expansion that seems to fix a lot of those issues. So that's the thing that I'm excited to try, because I also have the physical version, but I haven't gotten Arc Nova to the table recently. So I'm going to try it out on BGA and then hopefully get it to the table after I feel a bit more comfortable with it. But that's the thing that they introduced, I think, kind of for that reason, where it's they know they have a lot of cards and they need to get them through, rotate the cards more frequently. And I think that's...
It also introduces a search element, which is, I think, the other thing. You know, like there are some built-in ways, independent of the deck, that if you really want to and you put the time and effort to get them before someone else gets them for that particular thing, you can search for something that has a specific tag. It might not be the best thing with that. It might not be something that you for sure can do or create, but if you really need to get a lizard to the table, you can fish for a lizard.
Yeah. I think that there's games, in theory, should reward you for investing your actions and time into a certain path to an extent. Again, I think that there are times when you should, if you've played the game enough, should know that the odds are not the best to have this happen for you. Where it's, again, in Arc Nova, if you're trying to go for birds, because of how massive that deck is, there is a chance you just aren't going to see birds, and that's unfortunate. That is unlucky. But you have chosen to go down that path.
Right.
And it might really pan out, but that's a thing that works.
Do you think that luck has a place in thematics? Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at, yes, you can reflect a theme of luck by having luck elements, but I mean, does it enhance the theme of a game to have luck? Because luck is ever present in our world, right? Whether you believe in like some sort of mystical karma type thing, or that there's just an incalculable amount of probabilities in the world that, like there's no perfect way to navigate or account for all the things that might happen. Sometimes you just get lucky or unlucky. Like if board games are supposed to be some sort of simulation that may be more or less thematic and more or less representative of a specific thing, in some ways divorcing it entirely of luck can be less realistic, less thematic.
Yeah, well, I think that there's everything in life has some element of luck, and I think it's just there's so much, I think you put it pretty eloquently, incalculable probabilities going on in the world that you just, things are going to happen. You drop a fork, it's just as bad luck, but it's a thing that is going to happen because you held it in a weird way. And I think that in games, it can be very thematic. To have some sort of element that is just unknowable, where it's, I think that a game that does it really well is Dune Imperium with the intrigue cards. Those are like so incredibly thematic of you don't know the secret plans of all of the other houses around you. And that's, I think, a really great way to obfuscate what the opponent can do in a way that fits really well with the theme of that world. At the same time, I think that sometimes it's a little bit weird. Like, why is it that in terraforming Mars, my only option is throwing asteroids at things or blowing up asteroids?
Sure.
I think that there's some luck there that it's just, well, these are the cards I'm dealt. And I think Terraforming Mars is another game where I have zero complaints about the amount of luck in that game. I think that game does a really great job of, you are given options. And those
you're
options
presented the
perfect.
levers to interact with the game that presents the luck elements. And like when I'm thinking about the thematics, I'm thinking about like my favorite moments in games. The games where I have jumped out of my seat and just like been like, yes, like those have always been, I guess, predicated on luck, right? I was playing Kelp recently with my son, and we were both having a great time, and he knew that his dad, as a shark, was just about to get him. And he knew the only way for him to possibly win was to draw into the food card that he needs at this time. But he had a full hand of like all but one card. And drawing a card is an action. There was a safe way of playing if he just dumped some cards this turn so he'd have more room to draw into his final food card next turn. or the next round when it came to him. However, he also knew that there was a really strong chance that I was going to win on my turn because I knew exactly where he was. He had no escapes left. And so with only one card draw, and knowing he'd have to shuffle his entire discard pile, and he's not at the age where he's calculating probabilities except on like an intrinsic level. He knows there's going to be a big deck and only one card in it, and I'm only drawing one card at this time. He was like, nah, I got to do it. And he shuffled up his deck, and yeah, as a dad, I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of skeptical as what's going on there. And I even was like, you know what? I'm going to cut your deck for you. And I did, thinking, all right, finally, I'm going to toast this kid. And then he drew his card, and he just jumped up and screamed and was like, yes, yes, yes. And he played the card as his second action, which you can take 2 actions on a card or on a turn. And one of the actions is to actually draw your hand. So he took a huge risk, but was able to eke out this win. And I don't feel like that's a situation where he won based off of the luck of the draw. He won based off of assessing what are the possible outcomes here and then using the tools available to make for the only win that he thought was realistic, because the chances of losing next turn were even greater than the chances of I'm getting my graders and less thans all mixed up here. The chances of him losing next turn was going to be greater than the risk in trying to take just the one card out of his deck. It was a stupendous victory to a game that was made only possible by having randomized elements where we knew the odds for both sides and just working into it. And that's not the kind of thing that you get in a game that absolutely minimizes luck. And it's also one of the elements that allows me, a nearly 40-year-old man, to play a game against a 10-year-old in which I'm pretty certain I'm going to win, but he has the ability to maybe pull something out through cunning and also recognizing how much luck there is and what he can do to mitigate that.
Yeah, and I think that is the thing that luck brings to board games, is it makes it so you cannot know the exact outcome and you can't calculate it out. Like that is why we have luck in board games, is to help obfuscate what's going on around you. I now have used obfuscate twice in this podcast, and I think both times were justified. But we can maybe do an obfuscate counter in the corner. That would
I like it.
That. But it's just like a thing that you need to not be able to calculate out everything that happens in the game to have that sort of tension that can bring those highs. And I think that's like
right.
That is really I think, what we need. Like that is.
I think that's what you're talking about. The tension, right? You know, like the tension is what gives the unpredictability. The person who is maybe of greater skill or greater knowledge or depth or, you know, whatever it is, experience with a game, by allowing for a degree of luck, you're still giving the satisfaction of having that sort of investment and feeling like you have put the time in, you put the work in, you understand the game, but you don't have the certainty that what you're doing is a guarantee. So there is always a risk on the other end of that, and that gives you decision space. If there's a guaranteed outcome, then that removes a decision. And if you have a degree of risk, then you're having to think about, like, do I want to hedge my bets? Do I really want to take a long shot? Is this safe? Is this not safe? And then the same thing is true for the underdog of the story is that they do have something that can help balance things out and help them feel like, okay, well, if I just do this, I might be able to, which is, I think, what we want, and bringing it back to that thing that you were talking about at the beginning, that no one wants to feel like they're playing a game that they can't win. I think it's that for this play space with adults who are not doing tournament level play and whatnot, and you can have games with tons of luck in tournament level play, but approachability, something that people feel like they can learn, like they don't have to invest 15 games in to understand, that they're just going to go to their friend's house after dinner and play some games. You want something that's going to help them feel like we aren't doing a high level cunning, fencing match with cardboard pieces. They want to feel like, you're having fun. And unpredictability to a degree can be what generates fun and accessibility. And that feeling that if I lost, well, maybe I just got unlucky.
Yeah, it also... Yeah, I just think that there's... Luck can bring so much to a board game that needs it. Like, it can bring that... Especially, Kelp's an awesome example where it's... That game has, I feel like, from not having played it yet, actually, but from the outside, it seems like there's a ton of luck, but it seems like it is all... levers that you're pulling, the risks of what you're doing. And I think that there's, because of that, the tension is so high that it can have these like really high elation moments. Whereas in a game like, this is a game that we both love, it was our number one on our list, Harvest, I feel like there's not going to be those super high elation moments, even though we both clearly think it is an awesome game.
Right.
The randomization in that is just what buildings are coming out and then what sunrise tokens are available. Right. And that is all that is up to chance. Everything else, at least what the options are. And some other players might take your options, so you might feel happiness or stress once you know what options are available to you on your turn based on what other players do. But that is a game that I think, even though we think that it is a stellar game, I don't think it is going to hit those high highs that Kelp might have. But at the same time, and you, I think, are like obviously a great sport about it, there are going to be people who are super upset as the shark to have lost that way in Kelp. And I don't think it's necessarily justified, because you should know like that was a risk they took, but they did put themselves, like they played and put themselves in a position where they had that chance. Right. Like that is part of the game, is you play to that level of luck.
And I think that so this discussion paired with a listener question that I want to get to here in just a little bit is what had me thinking about Battlestar Galactica, which is one of the more infamous games to have like a critical dice roll in it. The only other one that I think of at quite that level is Oath, both of which have a dice roll that can trigger the end of the game or like come at a very critical moment. And they're one of my favorite ways of accounting for luck, especially when it comes to dice, is modifiers. Dungeons and Dragons has that all the time. If you have a strength stat that gives you +3 and you roll a d20 and then you add 3 to it, or whatever you're rolling.
That was really good for somebody who doesn't play D&D. It was really spot on.
Okay, there you go. And so in Battlestar Galactica, famously, you have to make these jumps, which you can either fill up a gauge to be able to do this predictably without any risk, or you can do it early with greater and greater risk, which can be offset. you have to be able to meet a certain threshold, but then at that point, you're taking a risk if you do it. And sometimes you just got to take that risk. And that may be the difference between victory or defeat. Mm-hmm. And you roll a d8 to determine if you succeeded in the outcome. And a lot of people would say, I hate that my game came down to a dice roll. But I don't honestly believe that it came down to a dice roll. That dice roll is just the culmination of all the decisions that led up to that, mm-hmm. and the risks that you chose to take right up until that point, or the decisions that led you to believe that it was safe or not safe to do the previous dice roll. Oath has a game ending which might come as a result of a dice roll, and as you go through later and later rounds, that dice roll is more likely to end the game. And I saw, as soon as the rule book came out for that, people were talking about like, oh, my game can end because of a dice roll? That's totally lame. And it's like, no, you understand the risks. As long as people are aware of what the random elements can bring, and there are ways to work around those elements, then that is, to me, an acceptable level of randomization in a game. And this made me think of Battlestar Galactica so much that just back here, I bought Unfathomable. Because I was like, oh, well, I've been meaning to play that game, and I got John coming to town. I'll just play the new adaptation of BSG in, a public domain setting with him. That'll be great. Yeah. Real quick. All right. Dice or cards? Which do you prefer when it comes to random elements?
Cards. I think they give you a higher level of customization. Like, I mean, I think that's the mm-hmm. Isaac Childress in his designer diary for Gloomhaven was like, cards just give you so many more things that you can pull, where you can know the odds, and you can change them in a way that you can't really do with dice in a lot of ways.
So Settlers of Catan, at one point, you could buy a set of cards that was the 36 possible outcomes for the dice, but that way it made sure that there was an even distribution of, because in Catan, you have the pips that tell you how mm-hmm. frequently you're going to roll a 3 based off of 2 dice or whatever. But because that's randomization, like, just because something happened in the past doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to have something happen in the future, which is a gross misunderstanding of how randomization and luck works, and why mm-hmm. some people are like, how can we have rolled 3 3s? How can that be possible? Well, that's because that's how statistics and randomization in the universe works. When you are individually doing like a dice roll. But, the cops are coming for me. The randomization cops are coming for me.
Because I'm about to bring a hot take. Okay. After you feel free to finish.
Would you feel better about a set of 36 cards? Or would you rather the dice in Catan there?
I think the cards bring a much different element where you are trying to predict what's coming out, and you can then make decisions based on it, where it's like, okay, I know that we haven't really pulled many 4s. I was between building either on an 8, which has been pulled a couple times, and a 4. Mm-hmm. I think that changes the game a pretty substantial amount. Right. I think that with Catan, the luck is the game in a way, where it's the whole point is you don't have a solid frame of mind of what is going to come next, so you don't know that you're likely to get a sheep in the next few rounds, so you won't trade for sheep. And I feel like that changes the game entirely from a social negotiation game to a
much more of a probability-based strategy game.
Yeah. I think that takes away from what what Catan aiming to do. Like, the whole point of Catan
Right.
is that there is this randomness that you can't control. And that's
Okay.
a lot of games have that in a way that works, and then some games have it in a way that does not work. That would probably benefit from that card.
Okay, continuing lightning round. D&D guy over here, role player. Would you prefer a game that has a D20 with a modifier system, or would you rather a game that uses multiple D6s so that way you have a nice bell curve of outcomes where you're much more likely to have a median, probability center as opposed to having a D20, which is equal potential outcomes of all of those, and then just apply a modifier?
I think that it depends on the role-playing game you're playing. With Dungeons and Dragons, it makes so much more sense to have it be this random, chaotic thing that you can control via your modifiers and via other abilities that will let you re-roll things. I think that for games that have a lot less randomness in terms of what's happening, especially with your average D&D campaign, I think having it be like you roll 3d6 so that you are much more likely to roll this number. You have the chance of rolling 18, you have the chance of rolling just 3, but almost certainly you're rolling, I think on average for that it would be 10 or like 9.5. It would be 11.5.
As far as my experience with Baldur's Gate 3, I'm pretty sure that a singular dice has the potential of being cursed and just constantly effing me over, whereas I'm much more trustful of the homogenized group of dice.
Yeah, well, and I've played role-playing games that do have you're rolling multiple dice, and it's just whatever it ends up being is much more likely to be an amicable result. And I think that can work. I think it just depends on what game you're playing. I think there are some games where it just feeling more in control of the luck would make it a whole heck of a lot better. One example, and we have it as a viewer question, so I feel like this is a good time to transition into our viewer questions. This is from Flippin721. Luck mechanics in games are sometimes brought up as something negative, especially in regards of older games like Monopoly, as a way to distance yourself from normal people not being in the hobby. So it's used as like I hate Monopoly because it's all luck dependent and it feels very gatekeepy. With that said, what is your take on how the luck mechanic has evolved since the 80s and 90s? And they have a couple examples there. My immediate thought is game designers have gotten a lot more aware that people prefer to have control. They want luck to change things. You want luck to change how the game state is at the moment, but you want players to know what outcome will happen when they take an action, or at least feel like they know the probability how things are going to happen. I think Monopoly is a really good example of a game that could probably do with a little less luck, but that is also like,
well, I mean,
that is the game again. That is the game.
Yeah, and like Monopoly gets a lot of crap, but at the same time, there are so many house rules that people have baked into Monopoly. Like a lot of people's perception of Monopoly is what they played as a kid, where them and their siblings were making free parking give you $1 billion, and then it's just a complete horrifying nightmare after one person landed on free parking. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of outcomes that are actually in the game that feel punitive based off of the luck of the roll. But I do think that even for an early game, Monopoly does a lot of things right.
Yeah.
Like you have 2 dice, so you have that bell curve of potential outcomes, so you can kind of have a predictability of how many spaces about you're going to move. The card draws, are not too intrusive as far as, you know, when you're getting rewards or slight punishment. Probably the most punitive thing is going to jail or landing on someone else's property, but landing on someone else's property is after they've taken the time to invest in what the best possible properties are. I think a lot of people's distrust of Monopoly, if they are past that, you know, house rule stage, is, you know, like, Monopoly is just a mean game. It's the combination of luck and meanness. Like, that feels exceptionally bad, to have both bad luck and for someone else to really be sticking it to you. That's when, you know, like, it feels like you want to overthrow a table. But yeah, I like you said, accountability, being able to mitigate luck. There are so many more times in which you can have re-rolls, or, you know, take alternate paths, or, you know, add modifiers to things that are just baked into pretty much every game at this point. And I think the potential negatives of a mandatory lucky thing are not as bad as they once were. You know, you don't have as many games with skip a turn because some bad thing happened. Like, that just sucks.
You're like, oh, well, guess I'll go now. Yeah, I think...
Or if you roll bad, you get some sort of kickback now. It's not like, you know, like a good example is Cora is a game that I have that you have to roll dice, and you want the dice to be as high as possible, but at the same time, you do get a little bit of a kickback if you roll poorly, and you get priority over other players, and I think that's perfectly fine. You know, designers are just smartly approaching what are the things that people feel bad about as a consequence of luck, and how do we soften that blow?
Yeah, I think with Monopoly, just as an example, I think there are things you could do to mitigate the luck in a way that would make it more similar to modern board games. But, like, Monopoly is such a stronghold in terms of, this is such an approachable game. This is, because it's very luck dependent, some people are going to be better at the negotiation part of it, just based on charisma, but, like, a lot of people have chances to win this in a way that a lot of other games there are not. I had a PowerPoint night a while ago where I was talking about how to fix Monopoly in, like, a silly way. And the end result was, I suggested you have people, all properties automatically started as bidding instead of does the person not buy it, so that property values are more in the air. And instead of dice, you have a deck of cards numbered 1 through 6. That's like a whole bunch of them. You have a hand of 3, and you play 2 of them, and then you draw 2, you refill. So your options are still limited, but it's still a little random of, like, I have 3 6s, so I'm going 12 spaces. But I think that just crushes what Monopoly is meant to be.
Right, and that kind of brings it back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, which is, you know, like, you want to judge a game on what it's aspiring to be and what it delivers and what its strengths are, you know, as a game itself, rather than purely evaluating on, like, what is your own sweet spot. The next question, I think, kind of puts the nail to the head, if that's even a metaphor, to what we were talking about this whole podcast. You know, I want to say this is Virgil Alighieri, 7192. There you go.
Come on,
come
Virgil
on.
Alighieri.
Most people in the hobby don't like very luck-filled games because they like to still feel as if they're making decisions. If you could only choose one, would you rather play only no luck games or only medium luck games? I think I know the answer for both of us, which is medium luck games.
I am terrible at chess because I haven't invested the time to get good at it. I don't want to play it. Like, I think... And
even if I got really good at it, I don't want to play those kinds of games because a lot of people don't want to, like have that. And even if I'm winning every single game, more than that, I want people to play with me in the games that I like to play. So, I want things that make people feel like they have a chance and like they're having fun and like epic moments are happening. No luck games have their place.
Yeah.
I do like that, but you need a dedicated person, ideally who is about your skill level, to continually invest in that. It requires a level investment to really get the most out of those games. And that's just not the gaming I do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's just so much of gaming that luck brings so much more positive than negative most of the time.
Right.
Not all of the time, but most of the time, luck is bringing something that either helps people play the games more, helps replayability, where it's like you're trying to set up a perfect engine with just whatever happens to be in your hands. Like, I think that's why games like Race for the Galaxy are so awesome. It's you don't know what you're getting, and you have to this is what you have, this is what you're starting with, and that the randomness of that is so much of the fun of the game.
Totally.
So medium luck game all the way.
And that brings us to our last one. Why don't you go ahead and read Carl Robinson's here?
Carl Robinson says, what are your thoughts on games that feature negative emotions for overall positive experiences? What is the game that you experience the most negative emotions during playing but still love?
So this is the one that made me think about Battlestar Galactica as well, because it's a game I have a real hard time lying. It's something that gives me a lot of anxiety, but at the same time, it's kind of like a horror movie. I love horror movies. They give me a lot of anxiety. I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, I love horror movies. They don't scare me at all. They freak me the F out, but I like that feeling. And the same thing is true in games with that sort of social deduction element, or trying to play a long con and you're just praying you don't get found out. And nowhere is that more palpable than in something like Battlestar Galactica and hopefully Unfathomable, which I picked up because I was like, man, I want that feeling again. And it gives me anxiety. It gives me dread. And also there's that paranoia element that the person that you're having to trust, you are forced to make a decision. Am I going to trust the person next to me? Knowing full well you don't have perfect information that they for sure are the person, and that trust can be broken. And maybe other people don't feel that as palpably as I do, but that is a really powerful feeling, and part of the thematic resonance of Battlestar Galactica. The original design, and I'm certain is replicated here, is that you are forced into these situations that bring about very negative feelings.
Yeah, well, and I think that we touched on this earlier, but stress is such a strong motivator for games. Stress is tension. Stress is trying to figure out the best possible solution, but you just cannot be sure. That is like the core feeling for a good chunk of games that are awesome. And I think that there's, even if it's like not analysis paralysis type stress, if it's more just like, oh, we have to do this thing really quickly, like Kitchen Rush is a stressful game,
Yeah,
but that
yeah,
is
totally.
so much fun because it's stressful. I think that there are other emotions that I don't necessarily think I would say I've ever felt the full brunt of. Like most of the times, those things are just stress. Like I don't know if I've ever felt fear during a game. Like I felt like real tension of, oh, is this going to work out or not? Like, but I don't know if I would necessarily say that's fear.
Yeah, this question also brought to mind something that we don't really explore that much in games, though certainly it has been touched upon, is like sensitive subject matter. Because gaming, by default, we tend to think, especially board games, because a lot of people have this notion associating them to childhood, and so they should be friendly and light and fun. Even if they're combative, they should be somewhat fluffy. Video games had this as well, but I think video games have matured and kind of divorced itself from, like the need to stay away from sensitive subject matter. But like really sensitive game topics, particularly in historical games. I'm thinking of Freedom, the Underground Railroad, for example. Incredibly weighty topic, fully cooperative game. And I don't know that I've really felt anything quite as powerful in a board game in the same way, at like an emotional level, as having to evaluate how much time I was going to put into like trying to rally politicians, knowing that that is taking money away from direct intervention and watching the cubes accumulate at the top of the board as lost slaves, recaptured slaves, and recognizing that this money has to be spent on all sorts of things. This money has to get the politicians to pass like certain acts. I have to do lobbying, but that's also resources that could be allocated to other things. And just seeing that in such a visceral level was like, whoa. To be honest, I have immense respect for that game, but it bummed me out to the point where I'm like, I'm so glad that I played that. I don't need to own Freedom Underground Railroad. I think every student should play this game. I don't need to own this. I think this War of Mine, the board game adaptation of that, touches on some very similar things. And I think more and more historical games are starting to explore a space of where you're looking at oppressed people, like intersectionality between fringe groups, having the different oppressors. I'm thinking of like Block by Block is another great example of this. Molly House with the kind of like uncelebrated and unrecognized in mainstream America, at least, long-standing history of LGBTQ peoples in Britain in the Victorian age. Like that's touching on some real heavy subjects, but also I think the best of those are trying to present it in some way that you can also kind of have fun with a degree of respect for it too. So I don't know. I really like seeing it in games when there's emotionally weighty stuff, but it is kind of guilty to be like, sometimes I want those to be like maybe not too in my face because I like having my like popcorn, feel good game time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, and I actually have not played the board game adaptation of it, but I love this War of Mine. Even though it is such a sad game. Like, that is such a sad topic where it's all of the decisions you make feel so much more weighty than I think most other games, because there is so much emotion attached to it. And I really love that video game, so I'm sure I would also love the board game adaptation, because it's had great reviews from everything I've seen. You like it. It sounds like I might have to try and find
do a
that.
little peek-see.
Yeah, do a little peek-see.
See if you can get a copy. I hear it's great solo. So, there you go.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of my thoughts on, negative emotions in games. I think that there's a place for it.
Yeah, I think there's a place for it. I think mechanically, evoking certain emotions through the pressures, the mechanics, can be really interesting. And I think you really hit it with like pressure, tension. Yeah. To feel pressure is to feel that adrenaline rush and a degree of anxiety. Everyone's going to react to that different, but you want to feel some sort of pressure in almost any game that you're playing.
Yeah.
That's why people come to games. But also thematically, weighty topics. I think there's so much more room to explore themes, but also relationships of players to one another and what we evoke in one another and the types of interactions that we have. So, I don't know. Games are cool. There's lots of games out there. We should play them.
We should. And I think that there's, there's a space for negative emotions, and there's also a space for luck. And that, I think, is a great way to wrap up this podcast.
Well, where can people contact us?
If you have any questions about anything, we're going to start trying to post roughly what topic we're going to be talking about the day of. So please find us on our YouTube channel, the Cardboard Herald, if that is not where you're currently listening to us. You can also email in questions at cardboardherald@gmail.com. Or shoot us a message on any of the socials we're on. Are we on socials?
We're on some socials. Generally, if you're on a social, you can find us there. Yeah. We're pretty much sticking to like Blue Sky and Instagram right now is where we're posting the most of our stuff.
Yeah.
But
find us there.
You can also just find the website, cardboardherald.com, and there's a contact us there too.
Yeah. Let us know any questions you have. We would love to answer them. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Eric.
And I'm Jack.
Thank you for being an awesome community, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.